Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. Alhamdulillah. Alhamdulillahi Rabbil Alameen. Wassalatu wassalamu ala Sayyidil Ashafil Anbiya wal Mursaleen. Sayyidina Muhammadin wa ala alihi wa ashabihi ajma'een. Amma ba'd. Fa'udhu billahi minash shaitanir rajim. Bismillahir Rahmanir Rahim. In last week's lesson, I was mentioning that it is the right of the husband to issue talaq or to give divorce or talaq to his wife. And I mentioned the Islamic reasons, the hikmah and the wisdom behind husbands having the exclusive right of giving divorce and talaq to their wives. And I also mentioned one or two Quranic verses which indicates towards this particular point. وَإِن طَلَّقْتُمُ النِّسَاءَ فَإِن طَلَّقَهَا. These Arabic words indicate that the option or the right of giving talaq belongs to the husband. Now obviously people, by listening to this particular ruling, may object and say that, okay, just say for example if there is a husband who's abusive to his wife, who doesn't fulfill his wife's rights, or just say for example if the husband has left home, has run away with another woman, gone to another country, another town, and has left his first wife here, say in Birmingham, or with the children and so on. So in that situation, what can the wife do? Because there may be certain situations where the husband, because he's not fulfilling the rights, it makes sense for the party to go their separate ways. But you have a situation here where the wife, say for example, is in a middle situation. Her husbands have left her and no one knows where the husband is. Just say for example, the husband is abusing her and she can't live in that particular marriage. So what can the wife do in that particular situation? Because the Sharia quite clearly says that only husbands can give talaq. So now if the husband is not giving his wife talaq where he should be, where they should be separating and going their separate ways, then what can a wife do in that particular situation? Now as I explained right at the beginning of this topic, that the beauty of Islam is that Islam has a solution and has a hal for everything. Obviously Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala being al-Hakim, being the most wise, He knew of this situation that there may be husbands who may use this particular right for their favor, for their advantage. So the Sharia has also given some other solutions, some other answers for that particular wife who may need to separate, but the husband is not willing to give her a talaq or a divorce. Now there are two things what the wife can do. Number one, the first thing she can do is what we call in Arabic a khula. Now what does khula mean? Now khula literally means to take out, nikanna, to like take something out. That's what khula means. And technically speaking, khula means that the wife, the dowry the husband gave her, the wife can return that dowry and in exchange ask the husband to give her a talaq. Or like say for example, the wife may tempt the husband in terms of saying to the husband that, look, I'll give you £10,000 or an amount say more than the actual dowry, like 10,000, 20,000, I'll give you half the house, or you could keep all the house, give me a talaq, give me a divorce. So basically that's one option the wife has, that she can say to the husband that, okay, I'll give the dowry back, or I'll give you a house, or I'll give you this, I'll give you that, give me a divorce, give me a talaq. Now this option sometimes it could actually work for some husbands. Some husband may think that, okay, this money is not really going anywhere, we don't really get along with each other, I might as well use the dowry money which I gave to her, I might as well use this dowry money and then give her a talaq and then get married to someone else, and I can use this dowry money for the second wife. Or just say for example, if the wife is saying to the husband that, okay, you could have all the house, give me a talaq. So the husband may think, you know what, it's not actually a bad deal. Give her a talaq, we're not actually getting along, we're not actually in love with each other, the marriage hit the rocks, so might as well give her talaq, and then obviously I could use this house and then get married, and then my new wife would be able to live in this house. So what khula basically means is that the wife will try to tempt the husband financially, either returning the dowry or giving a house or anything. It doesn't have to be the dowry, it could be anything. Like the wife may have some other savings, she buys a house or a car, whatever, and says to the husband that you could take this, but give me a talaq and give me a divorce. So that's one option the wife has in that situation to cancel or annul the marriage, and this is what we call a khula. So obviously if the husband agrees to it, then the talaq would be effected, and this talaq which will come about is what we call a talaq-e-ba'in, irrevocable divorce. So that's the first option the wife has to cancel the marriage or ask for an annulment of the marriage. Now the second option the wife has, so the first one is the khula, where basically, remember khula is she's either going to tempt him with the dowry or something to get a divorce. Now the second option the wife has is taking her case to Islamic Sharia council. Now there are a few Islamic Sharia councils around the UK. There's one in Dewsbury, there's one in King's Heath. Mufti Abu Zufar Sahib, I think he runs that particular Islamic Sharia council. There's one in London and so on. So they are these places, Islamic Sharia councils you call them, where the wife could take her case to them and they'll listen to her case, and if they think fit, they'll contact the husband, and if, again, by looking at the case, if they find out that the husband's being too abusive to her, not fulfilling her rights, so on and so forth, then they can cancel and annul the marriage. Now let me just briefly explain Islamic Sharia Council and what's the component of an Islamic Sharia Council, what they should be doing, and in which situations can they cancel or annul a marriage. Now it's mentioned in the books of fiqh that Islamic Sharia Council must have at least 3 people sitting on the board. So it can't be like a one-man job, like one scholar or imam sits there and he just says, okay, the marriage has been cancelled or the marriage has been annulled. There has to be 3 scholars there. They don't all have to be muftis, but they have to at least be alims and scholars. And they have to be those who are well versed when it comes to rules regarding marriage, talaq and divorce. Now Maulana Ashraf Ali Thanwi rahimullah in his Hilatul Najiza has mentioned that the basis or the reality of an Islamic Sharia Council is to bring the couples together, is to reconcile between the couples. The main thing of an Islamic Sharia Council is not to issue a talaq or a divorce. The talaq and the divorce should be the very last thing. Their main number one primary objective should be reconciliation, trying to bring the couples together. So just say, for example, if a wife is complaining to an Islamic Sharia Council about her husband, that husband being abusive, the Islamic Sharia Council should then take steps to actually determine whether it's actually true or not. Because unfortunately what happens nowadays is that there are a lot of Islamic Sharia councils where the people who are on board, they're not scholars, they're not alims, they're not muftis, they're just like doctors or lawyers who are on board. And we call these Sharia councils like very women friendly, in terms of a woman will like write to them and say, oh, my husband hits me. So they say, okay, your husband hits you, and then straight away, without listening to the husband's side of the argument, they just cancel the marriage. Now the danger about that is that without looking at the husband's side, because remember this is one of the adabs when it comes to qazi and giving judgment and faisla, is that you should listen to both sides of the argument. You can't just listen to the wife's side and just say, oh, your husband's being abusive to you, okay, let's just grant her wish and just cancel the marriage. You have to listen to the husband's side and determine what the wife is saying, is it true or not. Because what normally happens nowadays is that there may be some women, some girls who are a bit bored in their marriage, they're not kind of getting along, they ask their husbands for talaq or divorce, husband doesn't give it, so what they do, they contact these Sharia councils, and the Sharia councils just give them the talaq and divorce, and they then go and get married to somebody else, where in reality, when you look at it, it's not permissible for them to do that. They get married somewhere else, and obviously they then live a life of sin, zina, guna for the rest of their life. So as I was saying, that the main basis of an Islamic Sharia council is to actually listen to both sides of the story. And even if it's a real, like a hard-hitting accusation against a husband of abuse and so on, even then they shouldn't haste to giving talaq, or they shouldn't haste in cancelling the marriage. They should try to obviously mediate between them, give them a couple of months, see what happens. And only when they've tried everything and it seems as though that the husband's not interested, the husband's not bothered, or the husband is still abusing the wife, then in that situation, then they can think about cancelling or annulling the marriage. Because there's been a lot of cases where, because the sad thing is that this, what I've just mentioned, people's life can just get destroyed by that one decision. Children's life, lineage, nasab can be destroyed by one decision. Because sometimes when we give decisions or fatwas, we just think about, oh, it doesn't matter, it's just them. But what happens is that children could be destroyed here. Because if you, without looking at the whole picture, was to just listen to the wife and say, oh, the husband being abusive, and just issue the talaq and the cancellation of the marriage, then the wife leaves the home, the husband's distraught, then they've got children involved, they're like sad, the father's not there, and then that leads to so many problems later on. So it should be the last thing the Islamic Sharia Council should think about is issuing a divorce or a talaq. After they've tried everything and then realize that, look, this is not working out or happening, then only then they should think about issuing a talaq or divorce. And what I'm just saying, I'm not just saying it from my own opinion, this is what Mawlana Shaykh Ali Thani Rahimullah has written in his Hilatul Najiza. Hilatul Najiza is a book which just specifically talks about these cancelling the marriages and annulling the marriage. All these things are mentioned by Hazrat himself in this particular book. Now moving along, what are the situations? So I mentioned the components or the basis of Islamic Sharia councils, but in which situations can a Sharia council annul or do fasq or cancel a nikah or cancel a marriage? Now, I'm just going to mention a few reasons. Number one, the first situation is if the husband is missing. Like there are sometimes cases where the husband just leaves home and then the wife can't get in contact with him. So like he's gone somewhere, Pakistan, some people said, oh, he's got married again. Some people say, oh, well, he's passed away, whatever, these kind of situations. Now, in that situation, the Sharia council can annul and cancel the marriage. Some of the examples I've given, I just mentioned here, like if the husband is not fulfilling his wife's rights, or like, for example, if the husband is oppressing the wife, is abusing the wife, hitting the wife and so on brutally, these kind of things. So again, the Sharia council can annul and cancel the marriage. Now, some of the situations here which I need to clarify. If the husband, say for example, is impotent or he's unable to have children, so is this a valid reason for a wife to cancel the marriage? Now there's two things here. One thing is if the husband, say for example, can have sexual intercourse with his wife, but for some reason, say for example, his sperm count is low, or some of the reasons like that where he cannot have children. So based on that, i.e. not having children or cannot have children, the wife will not be allowed to cancel a marriage. Because remember, giving children is from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. There are many occasions where medically husband's been said, oh well, you can't have children, but the wife falls pregnant. Many occasions where it's been said to the wife that, look, you can't give birth to a child, but she falls pregnant. So having children is from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So as long as the man can have intercourse with her, if the husband can't have children because of his sperm being low or something like that, then that's something else. The wife won't be able to use that to cancel a marriage. However, if the husband can have intercourse with the wife, then that is sufficient and the wife won't be able to cancel or annul the marriage. However, if say for example, if the husband can't have intercourse with the wife, so I mean it's a difference. One is like he could have intercourse but no children. the wife can't cancel or annul the marriage. The second situation is where the husband can't have intercourse, in terms of either he's got problems there, or he can't have an erection or something like that, or some other reasons where he can't have intercourse with his wife. Now, in that situation, it's mentioned in the books of fiqh that the case can be brought to the Islamic Sharia Council. The Islamic Sharia Council would give the husband 1 year's respite. Like, we'll give him like muhlat for a year. We'll tell him that, okay, we'll give you a year and we'll see how it goes. Now, if after a year the husband is still the same, then in that situation the Islamic Sharia Council would be allowed to cancel and annul the marriage. However, if there's some improvement in the husband, then in that situation the nikah and the marriage will remain intact. So these are some situations which are mentioned where the Islamic Sharia Council can annul and cancel the marriage. Now, what I just mentioned here about, because sometimes when you listen to these stories, they sometimes could be very sad and very harrowing, where the husband is being abusive to the wife, oppressing the wife. And sometimes what happens is that the husbands, they use the right of talaq or divorce to their own benefit or to their own advantage. And you'll hear many stories where, say for example, the husband not getting along with his wife, he leaves home, he then gets married to somebody else, and he just leaves his first wife there in the middle, without any contacting, without fulfilling her rights, without giving her any nafqah, maintenance, and so on. Now, all these things, people then think, oh, this is what Islam teaches. That Islam teaches like husband should, go and get married twice, not fulfill the rights of one wife, and just like, fulfill the rights of the second wife. People think, or non-Muslims in particular, think that this is what Islam teaches. However, this is not something which Islam teaches. I mentioned before about the rights of 2 wives and so on, and how you should fulfill it, and the punishment, the severity of not fulfilling the rights of wives, what will happen to an individual in the hereafter. Now, a question arises here, I may go slightly off the topic here, but some people may argue and say that why does this happen? Why do people turn into this kind of oppressive monster that they don't fulfill their rights of their wives, they harm them, abuse them? Why does that happen? Now, there's many reasons why it happens, but the cause, shall I say, which kind of leads them to this particular slippery slope, is when they lose contact with the pious people, or when they lose contact with the masajids, with the markaz, with the centers. When that starts happening, that's when all the evil and the bad company outside starts affecting them. And when that starts happening, that's when zulm and oppression comes in. Now, suhbat, or good company, being with good people, being in a good environment, is something which is very important. In the Quran, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, Ya ayyuhal lazina amanu taqullah, which means, or those who believe, ittaqullah, fear Allah. Then Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, wa kunu ma'as sadiqeen, and be with the righteous people. So after you sort yourself out in terms of piety, taqwa, the next thing which you should do is wakunu ma'as sadiqeen, be with the pious people, hang around with the good people and the salih people, be with them, and then you'll see the effect in your heart. Now I'll just give you an example of the Sahabas, how they would feel when they weren't with Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam. And then you probably can understand from this hadith the importance of being with pious people and being in a good company and in a good environment. Now this is a very famous hadith which can be found in Sahih al-Bukhari. There was a Sahabi or a companion in the name of Hanzala Usaydi radhiyallahu anhu. And it's mentioned that he was Katibul Wahi, that he would write the Wahi and the divine revelations down. Now once he met Sayyiduna Abu Bakr radhiyallahu anhu, and like what happens when you meet friends, like, what's up, how's everything? So Sayyiduna Abu Bakr radhiyallahu anhu asked Hanzala radhiyallahu anhu that, how's everything, how are you doing? So Hanzala Usayd radhiyallahu anhu replied by saying that I have become a munafiq. These were the words. Hanzala, a Sahabi, a Katib Wahi, he's saying to Hazrat Abu Bakr anhu that I've become a munafiq. Now, Hazrat Abu Bakr anhu, when he heard this, he got taken aback a bit, like, remember, munafiq, innal munafiqina fi darkil asfali minan nar. They'll be in the bottom layer of hell. So when Hanzala radiallahu anhu said this, Abu Bakr radiallahu anhu got taken aback, like, okay, just hold on there. What do you mean that you become a munafiq? So then Hanzala radiallahu anhu replied to Abu Bakr radiallahu anhu when he said that, look, when we are with Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam, or when I am with Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam, I remember Jannah, I remember hell. When Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam talks about other things, we remember piety, we remember Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. He's experiencing the good feelings of Jannah and savior from hell when he's with Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam. And then he says that when I'm at home with my family, I then remember my family, my kids, my wife, my children, and so on and so forth. Then Hazrat Abu Bakr radiallahu anhu then says to Hanzala that by Allah I experience the same feeling as well. That when I'm with Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam, I could actually see Jannah and Jahannam in front of me. But when I'm at home, I think about family, I think about children, wife, so on and so forth. So what happened? They both went to Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam, and they said to Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam, the Prophet of Allah, we've become munafiqs. That when we are with you, we remember Allah and so on. But when we are not there, we think about our family and so on. So then Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam said to them that, look, you don't have to worry. If what you're talking about, in the state you're talking about, that you have to remember Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala all the time, if that was the case, then angels would have descended from the heavens and they would have shaken hands with you. Meaning, like, you don't have to be like proper 100% all the time remembering Allah. If that was the case, then obviously angels from heavens would have come and they would have like hugged you, shaken hands with you and so on. Now obviously a lot of other masails can be derived from this hadith, but what we can derive from this hadith, what is linked with the importance of suhbah and good company, is that look at the Sahabas, they would always be with Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam. But the half an hour or an hour when they weren't with Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam and were with their family, what were they saying? They were considering themselves to be munafiqs. So you can imagine, look at the Sahabas, they were with Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam. They were with the greatest creation on earth, more or less all the day. But when they weren't with Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam, they felt totally different. They felt totally like, away from Islam for that half an hour, 1 hour when they went with Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam. So imagine us when we are hardly, illa mashallah, we don't really come that often to the masjid as we're supposed to, when we don't really hang around with pious people, with imams and scholars. Then you could then imagine what our heart would be like. You could imagine that what is our state. I'll give you another hadith to explain the effect of bad suhbah and bad company. Again, this is another hadith which can be found in Sahih al-Bukhari, that once Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam was leading the salah, and he was reading the Quran, where when Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam, he started finding it difficult to recite some words. He wasn't getting mistake, but sometimes it happens that when you are, say, leading Taraweeh or something, it feels like the words are not coming out, fluently from your tongue. It's like, like you're just finding it difficult to say the words. So similarly, Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam was once leading the prayer, and the words seemed very, very difficult for Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam to pronounce. Now, after Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam finished the namaz, he then turned around and he said that one of the Sahabas, one of you had not performed wuzu properly. That you hadn't performed wuzu properly, and you have then come and joined the Jamaat and joined the congregation, and because of that reason, one of you not doing wuzu properly, it had an effect on me reciting the Quran. Now look at Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam, whose heart was so perfect, the best of Allah's creation. When somebody didn't do wuzu properly, it had an effect on him. Now, living in the society there are people who are doing bad sins more than not doing wuzu properly. People are committing adultery, drinking alcohol, gambling, these kind of things. So when we are living in a society when people are doing these bad things, then isn't it having an effect on us? It is having an effect on us. But the thing is that we don't realize it. It's like, say, for example, when there's a bad smell or a foul smell in a room, when you enter the room, At the beginning you get taken aback, but then afterwards you get used to it. So similarly, that's what's happening to us as well, that we're getting affected by the bad atmosphere outside. But because we're used to it, like we just like think of it to be normal. So when we wake up, we just think of it to be normal that people are drinking, people are doing adultery and fornication, people are gambling. We just think of it to be normal. So what's happening is that indirectly it's affecting us, but we don't realize it. If somebody like Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam could be affected by a Sahabi who didn't do his wuzu properly, I'm sure we'll easily be affected by people who are doing sins and gunas outside. So what we can gather here is that people who do go on the slippery slope, it starts from when they lose their contact with the masjid and the markaz. When they lose that contact with the center, with the masjid in the community, when they lose the contact with the pious people and so on, that's when all these bad things starts happening. That's when they don't differentiate between the rights of Allah, rights of servants. They just think of like their wife to be just like an object or a tool. They think of their children to be like tools and objects. They don't look after them. They do all these other oppressive things. So this happens when you lose the suhbah and when you lose that connection with the imams and the masjid and the centers and the marakizis. Now moving on very quickly regarding this point I mentioned. So I mentioned like there are two options which women can have to cancel and annul the marriage Islamically. One is the khula, and also number two is the putting the case through the Islamic Sharia Council. And this then takes me on to the third point with regards to, just say if a woman was to go to a civil court or was to go to one of these civil centers, civil courts or civil marriages, whatever, and she applies for a divorce. So basically, in other words, she's applying for a divorce from a UK court. Now the question is that, do you know her divorce, would that be considered valid or not? Now just very quickly, the way divorce law works in the UK, there's two things happens. Number one is the decree nisi, and then afterwards you have what we call the decree absolute. So what normally happens is that the petitioner is the person, so it could be the husband, it could be the wife, they file for a divorce. Okay, so they'll write an application form, they'll file for a divorce and they'll cite the reasons why they want a divorce. Then afterwards the judge will try to obviously get in contact with the other party, the respondent, and try to obviously ask him for his interpretation of the accusations the wife or the husband has made, or the reasons why the husband or the wife has made to cancel or annul the marriage. Then what would happen is that the first thing the judge would do is that he would issue what we call a decree nisi. Now remember, the decree nisi which is issued by the judge, that is not a talaq. Islamically we don't consider that to be a talaq. After the decree nisi is issued by the judge, the petitioner, whether the husband or the wife, would then make another application for a divorce, for a talaq, and the judge, the second time, if he agrees to it, he will then issue what we call a decree absolute. Now what I'm trying to say is that, you know, when the first letter is sent by the judge, the decree nisi, no talaq is considered to be effected Islamically. But it's only when the husband, so when the judge issues a decree absolute, only then the talaq would be considered valid Islamically. Okay, now let me have a look at the rulings and the masla, then I'll mention that what kind of talaq occurs from a decree absolute. Now just a couple of situations here without going into detail. If the wife, say for example, applied for the divorce, the husband, he got the letter. Now when the husband got the letter, he read the letter, like basically the wife wants the divorce. If the husband then, after reading the letter, then puts his signature on the letter, then that, by him placing the signature on the letter, would be considered to be a valid divorce and a valid talaq. Okay, so if the wife was to apply for it, but the letter comes to you, and then obviously you look at the letter, and they basically, the judge is asking that, do you agree, do you want to divorce her, and then you basically consent to it by signing it, then that would be considered to be a talaq or a divorce. The second situation is where the wife, obviously she's applied for a divorce or a talaq, the husband's got the letter, but he doesn't sign it. He just throws it in the bin or just like leaves it there. And then 6 weeks later, the decree nisi is granted. There afterwards, the decree absolute. Now, when that decree absolute is given, no talaq would occur. Islamically, there is no talaq. Why? Because the husband hasn't signed it, he hadn't consented to it. If he had consented to it, then it would be a talaq. But if he just left it as it is, so because as I mentioned before, like Islamically, a wife cannot issue talaq proceedings, it has to be the husband. So because the husband didn't sign it or he just threw the letter away, then in that situation, the talaq will not occur. Now, if the wife now goes and gets married to somebody else, she'll be living in sin. It will be considered to be a haram and adulterous relationship. And the third situation, a simple one, is like where the husband, instead of giving Islamic divorce, he wanted to make it a bit more official. So he then takes proceedings for a UK divorce. Obviously, he files for a divorce. He then signs it and so on. Then in that situation, talaq would occur. That's straightforward. So when the wife or when the woman files for a divorce, now just remember, if the husband agrees to it, signs it, it'll be considered to be talaq or divorce. If the husband doesn't agree to it and he just leaves the letter, even though the judge afterwards has issued a decree nisi and a decree absolute, it's not going to be a talaq, it's not going to be a divorce. And just finally, when the judge, say for example, does issue a decree absolute, then what kind of talaq would occur? Now it all depends on the words the judge uses. If say for example, if the judge uses words such as divorce and so on that letter, which the husband signed, then one talaq raj'i will occur. And I already explained the definition of talaq raj'i in terms of the husband and wife can get back together again. The husband will just have to revoke the talaq within the waiting period. However, just say for example, if, and most of the time the letters which the judge issues, the decree absolute, it's got words such as, I hereby cancel or annul the marriage or absolve the marriage, these kind of words. So if words such as absolve are mentioned or cancel are mentioned, they are considered to be talaq bain, i.e. ambiguous words for talaq, which I mentioned a couple of weeks ago. In that situation, talaq bain will occur. Irrevocable talaq or divorce, which means that as soon as he was sent by the judge, from that date the nikah would break. And obviously if they want to get back together again, they will just have to redo the nikah and redo the marriage. Okay, so that is, in a nutshell, is the way talaq occurs in this particular country. May Allah give tawfiq to everyone who said well with that one.
The school or college and you give the younger, I think it's better not to I've been doing the practice for the last 25 years. I see the girl married to the young boy, both young. And that day he's in a prison. I said to the guy, I said, why? You told the police, he raped me last week. And he's gone for 7 years. And this is the way that this girl is. They are